Well, welcome back, everybody. It was amazing watching that countdown at the end. I almost came back and started going 10, 9, 8, 7, but you could all see it. So I hope you enjoyed those previous sessions. I really enjoyed listening to my colleagues talk about the different perspectives, the different collections, and got a real sense of the richness. And we were seeing that in the chat just now. So our next session is looking at the editor tool itself, and we have, and just before we get started, if I can ask everyone who's not presenting to have their mic and video off as well. There's some amazing chat as well in the Slack chat. Oh, if we can, I think I was muted just then. So if we can use in the Slack channel, use the discussion channel so that everyone is in the same bit, that would be great. But there's some great questions and some great chat going on there, some fantastic questions, and while we might not be able to get to every single question, we will be looking at them and trying to follow up. I know colleagues have tried to capture those questions so we can have a look and follow up over the next few days as well. So our next session in the workshop is going to be kicked off by Mike Bennett, who is our digital scholarship developer and quite frankly, quite a genius. We have had some moments with Mike where we've just been astonished at what's been developed. So I would like to welcome Mike to start presenting.
Here I come. Hello.
Hi, Mike. Off you go.
Right. I am going to share my screen and hopefully it's going to share the right one. Zoom is always a bit tetchy with me. Hello. Hi, I'm Mike. I'm a digital scholarship developer here at the University of Edinburgh. And my biggest problem is that I don't know how to say no to interesting challenges. So I'm going to talk to you about some tools and some things we developed for working with primarily the session papers collection, but can be expanded to kind of work with other things as well, as hopefully you will see. So some of my colleagues previously have touched on the kind of issues with the collection is that it's very, very big. It's kind of inhumanly large to catalogue by hand. So we're looking at, can we automate some of this? Can we take away some of the burden from kind of the people who don't want to be sat there transcribing 6 million pages of text? And how can we turn this into a rich catalogue in a way that preserves the academic context of the original objects and doesn't just kind of say, we've extracted all of the data out of this this volume of text, now it is of no further use to us, off it goes, bye-bye. Because you can lose a lot through that, through just turning things into data. So keeping the context of the objects as they exist in our collections is very important. And then how can we make use of existing frameworks for serving the images, the data we extract? So we use very heavily something called IIIF, which I think some of you will probably have come across. This is the International Image Interoperability Framework. And I did manage to say that right for once. And this is a kind of an open API-based system for allowing large-scale sharing of high-quality images with deep zoom, with annotations, with kind of nice logical bibliographic ordering that's in use through a lot of institutions around the world. So the University of Edinburgh is a IIIF consortium member. So we are using this to present most of our digital collections online using this technology. And it forms the basis for the work we've done on the session papers collection so far. So the ultimate output from all of this, how can we best serve the academics and the researchers looking to use this material? The biggest problem is this material is locked away. You can't access it. If you want to find a case from a particular thing in the original volume, you can go to a room full of stacks and spend 5 years searching. Instead of actually getting the material and working on it. So the first issue we face is getting the text. We have the images. The digital imaging unit has produced lovely sort of several hundred megabyte TIFF files at an absurdly high resolution, as you saw earlier with the V-shaped scanner that Norman had in his presentation. So this is, something that I think will be common to a lot of people. OCR technology, optical character recognition, getting text out of images is not, a groundbreaking new thing. But when you're dealing with this kind of material, existing approaches have some problems. So a lot of the engines and the things are trained on text which is more modern. So they struggle with some archaic things that happen in older printed materials, such as the long S character, which tends to be rendered by most things as an F. So we end up, in our collection with lots of biff, and everybody has a lisp. It's, it poses some problems for working with the text afterwards. But the advantage is, because it's based on a neural network, you can train it. So we can take the OCR engine we're using and we say, okay, let's give it some more data, let's give it some more relevant data to work with so it understands better how to deal with older text. So we gave it a lot of examples of the long S character and said, you should recognize this as S, not as F. And that improves the output. It doesn't completely eliminate the issue, but it does make a big difference. And the kind of quality of transcription of the text is very important for all of the things that happen afterwards as the data kind of flows out of this initial thing. And the output we use, we maintain the coordinates of where the word is in the original image. So this is our kind of key thing of keeping the context of the original documents alive. So when it comes out, it looks a bit like this. So this is a snippet from an Alto formatted XML document. And you can see that we have kind of the words here. I don't know if my mouse is showing up, but I'm circling around them as they appear on the thing. And we have the positions of each word in the original image. So, okay, we have the text, we have the coordinates. What can we do with it? So obviously the first thing you want to look at with something like this is to make it as accessible quickly and easily as possible, full text search across the collection. This has been mentioned by several people already. It's a good way of exposing the sort of largeness of the collection immediately. We built a system based around IIIF, which implements full text search alongside presentation of the images in their original context. So when you search for something, we can not only return you, here are all the documents that matched your search, but also here are the images. Here are the parts of the image where the text you search for appears. And using IIIF, you can do this natively in a IIIF web viewer. And we can also present kind of a configurable snippet view of the search. Using existing technologies like Apache Solr, we can already do powerful text querying, full text matching. That's not just, if you spell something wrong, you won't get a hit, because that's not very useful for documents where there may be transcription errors. The OCR process will never be 100% perfect. Documents will come out with misrendered characters. So if the search fails because of that, it loses a lot of usefulness. So here's where it gets exciting. Let's see what it looks like. So we have a little front end here, called Session Papers Online. And as you can see, we've got a couple of example searches. Excuse me. So if you search for one of them, for example, insurance, what you see here is the results in context of the original images. And you can see that it's also matching insured, insurances, various other kind of past and present tense, stemmed words, so that it's not just matching insurance, but also it understands that you might want to see things that say insured. You can search for people's names to find people across the collection. So we have Sir William Gordon, and you can find other entities that exist. The British Linen Company crops up quite a lot. So you can see this, and if you click on this to see more, what happens is you go to the native IIIF viewer, So now what we're looking at is a kind of browsable click through of the entire document, but with the search navigation. So you can click on it and it will take you straight to where the British Linen Company, which is what we search for, appears across this document. So let's see what, oh dear. Please excuse me, I'm having a terrible technical issue.
Hi everybody, I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to do a filler while we wait for Mike to come back. If anybody has any questions in the meantime, then please do put them in the back. Elise has commented in the chat that the first time she saw this particular tool in action, my jaw was on the floor, and I think we have as well had that reaction from our colleagues at the University of Virginia. I mean, particularly Lauren, do you want to come in here and explain your reaction when you first saw what Mike had produced?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lauren Molds. I'm one of the technologists and archivists at UVA. And so we've been traveling back and forth over the last 4 or 5 years to Edinburgh and been working with Mike to sort of flesh out this tool. And when he showed us this, we had not expected it. We had theorized it. And then we were in a meeting at the CRC and he was like, he just sort of explained it was there and then moved on to his next talking point. And all of a sudden, wait, whoa, go back. And then we could just search and all of these things. So we were searching for all sorts of terms that we had been really curious about. Me personally, I'm really interested in the kelp industry just because I think it's so bizarre and cool. So we would search for kelp and all of a sudden all this stuff about kelp or Jamaica or transatlantic trade, anything that we could think of. And all of a sudden you were seeing snippets and you could click and it would go right to the image and it had cut down the amount of time that we would need to find some of these keywords or agents or locations from months possibly to seconds. So this would revolutionized how we were able to access our collection. It revolutionized how we could think about finding themes and finding historical subjects within the collection. So it's a remarkable tool. And that was sort of the first real iteration of Editor. And then it's now where hopefully Mike will be on soon to show where the next step, the next phase of this is.
Sure. And what really blew my mind about it as well is that being able to use and connect these different tools together. So what Mike had produced and then what was being developed and looked at with IIIF, as someone from a collections perspective as opposed to a technical perspective, it was really showing me that you could really make use of our knowledge about collections, connect it to into tools, and then have it be produced and represented and shown on a really interactive theme. So I think we've got Mike back. Mike, are you there?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. What a perfect time for my laptop to decide to crash.
That's the brilliant reality of these events, aren't they? So Lauren and I just wax lyrical about how amazing what you've produced is. So we'll let you continue.
So can I just check, at which point did I cut out? Did it go as far as, did you see the demonstration of the full text search?
Yes, it was right after you said I'm having a major technical issue and then you froze. So
okay, that was when all of the address, that was when all of my screen suddenly went black.
Well,
so yeah, okay, we've restarted, we're back. So I will, Elise, could you make me a host so I can reshare my screen? Sorry, everybody.
Mike, you're getting much sympathy from everybody in the chat. Stuff happens.
Yes. Let's put this up here.
Sorry about that, Mike. There you go.
Okay, let's see what I can do. Let's try again. Desktop number 2, share. Okay, are we back? Are we back?
It's great.
We're
Yeah,
back.
we're
Okay, let's carry on right where we left off. So, okay, we have the full text. That's pretty cool. But what if we could do more? That's a good question. So, how do you take something like a full text search and make it even better? So we look at things like textual annotation. This is a big thing. Again, this is not a particularly new or groundbreaking concept. It's been mentioned already kind of by the folks from UVA. It's an approach where we can add rich information to text corpora. We can say, hey, this is the part of the document that has the title. This is a person's name. This is a place. And there are existing tools for this process. So some of you may have come across a tool called BRAT, which is a web annotation tool for kind of collaborative annotation across many domains. But this itself also has problems. These tools are typically designed for working on raw text only, so reference to the original source material, the images is kind of lost because in a lot of existing text analysis and data science processing, the cultural background of the object is not considered as important as the text that is contained within them. And the second largest problem is that it mostly has to be done by hand. So as Jim talked about earlier, and Lauren and Randy, that it's feasible for smaller corpora, but we have approximately 6 million pages in the Court of Sessions, many of which still to be digitized. And there is not enough time before the sun swallows the earth to transcribe all of those by hand and to annotate all of those by hand. So what can we do to kind of speed up that process? So a lot of people now are using natural language processing and machine learning. It's a very rapidly expanding usage in the humanities. Again, I'm sure that a lot of you here will have things like this going on in your institutions and with the projects you're working on. And it solves some of the problems that exist in terms of things like, it's very good at named entity recognition. If you give a natural language processing engine a huge block of text, it can tell you quite easily, these are the people's names that appear. These are the places that appear. These are the organizations that appear. These are the dates that appear. So it can take away a lot of the what I lovingly call the donkey work of the annotation process, which I see as kind of a really important step in terms of making as much of the collection accessible as possible. It has its problems still, like all of these approaches. Extant training sets are based mostly on modern English documents. Like most of the data sets you find have been trained on newspaper articles or web comments or blogs. So they work well for like generalized problem solving for like, I have a scanned document that was made 20 years ago. I want to extract the data from it. Really good. When you say, I have a scanned court record from the 1600s, it starts to get a little bit iffy. And it doesn't do domain-specific annotation. So, for example, in the Court of Session papers, we're really interested in knowing who were the litigants in each case, who was the judge, who was the clerk of the court, because that's the kind of data we want to extract in order to build this kind of rich catalogue, which serves the material rather than just being, here are a list of all the people who exist inside the court records, which is useful if you know somebody's name. You can go and use the full text search, you can find the records. But if you want to browse it as a resource in context, it's hard to do that without the domain-specific data. So, hey, why don't we mash all of these things I've just talked about together? Right, and this is where my statement at the start of I have a hard time saying no to interesting problems comes into play, because this is exactly what we're trying to do. we're trying to take all of these existing techniques and ways of dealing with large amounts of data and make them into something that works for these type of collections, where you have a large amount of text, you don't have any or much catalog data at all, and it's nice to have domain-specific data extracted from the text. So we developed this thing called the editor tool, and it's an annotation tool designed for working with transcribed images. It's based around IIIF, the thing I've sort of mentioned several times before. I won't go into the huge sort of technical details of what this is and how it works. If you're interested, please hit me up in the Slack channel or on Twitter, and I'm happy to sort of answer questions and provide more information. And that goes for any part of what I'm going here. I'm rushing a little bit through the kind of heavy technical details because I think that they're probably of interest more to me than they are to a lot of you. But you know, if I'm wrong about that, please reach out. I'm here. So yeah, we take this. We use custom components in the natural language processing which preserve all the references to the original images. So that little snippet of XML I showed you with the coordinates to the images, we preserve this alongside the text as it gets processed, which means that then we can present those annotations with the image context to allow sort of easy enhancement and correction. And we can also use it to build a data set for training a machine learning model. So this is the kind of the fun bit, which is if we build a data set of some parts of the collection tagged and annotated correctly, we can take that data and then use it to train a model to go back across the rest of the collection and extract that data. So if we provide it with domain-specific data in context, we can then go back and give it a new page of text and say, I want you to extract from me the judge from this case. And because we have a trained data set, it's able to do that, whereas before it would maybe have just pulled out the person and said, this is a person's name, that's all I know. The aim is that we can get it to pull out and say, this person was the judge. So, okay, here's the nervy step 2. What does it look like? Let's just log in quickly since all my browser crashed. So it looks a little bit like this. So I'm going to bring up a document here. Thank you, LastPass. So what you can see here is one of the pages from inside the collection. So this is from a volume held in the Advocates Library, the Abercrombie collection, volume 22. And so here we see the original full page image, and this is in the deep zoom, so you can kind of go right in and really look at the original document and, you know, the high quality scanned image. But you can also see all of the entities that were extracted from this document, complete with the snippets showing the original bit of text that the engine found. And so in this, we can then start to annotate the entities that they exist. So we have roles, we can assign, you know, is it the judge, the clerk, various other roles here. So the advocate, writers to the signet. So all this domain specific data that we are hoping to extract, we can do it here in the context of the original image. So rather than just looking at a raw thing of text, you can see and compare in context what's happening on the page and the entities, the people, the places that exist within it. And as you can see here, this is Evie will be talking to you about this later. We have the ability to add notes, so we can add corrections here, spelling magistrates for where you see the engine has found has not registered this particularly well for whatever reason. So all of this information feeds back into the process I was talking about before of building the data set to improve the run the next time or for the next parts of data. So, I didn't start from the slide I was on. I'll be showing more demo of that tool in the session tomorrow, and there'll be a chance to kind of play around with it and see how it works for yourselves. So that's towards the end of tomorrow. And what are the outputs from this? that we kind of find ourselves with now, a data set of tagged data we can use to improve the model. So this means once we've tagged and transcribed some of the pages here, similar to how Transcribus works, as has been talked about and will be discussed further, we have a model that allows us to then apply it across the rest of the collection. We output in IIIF annotations, which allows, similar to the search interface that you saw before, a way of looking at the document kind of in a 2-up book viewer, but seeing highlighted bits, which will tell you, here is the extra rich catalogue information that we have derived about this image. It allows us to bring out the domain-specific data about the context of the text. So from the pages that we tag now and annotate now, as well as then in the future, the pages that are tagged and annotated by the model generated from the work we're doing now. And most excitingly to me, it unlocks the collection's resources. These are huge volumes of text which are, in essence, buried away. As was mentioned earlier, cases that were not significant didn't get reported. So some of this stuff is just there, and it might be of use or of interest to somebody studying it, but they have no way of finding it or getting to it or seeing it or using it. So the outcome, the most important outcome from all of this is that we make that accessible. We put it online, we give it context, we give the data, and we say to people, here you go. This formerly hidden thing is now unlocked. And I'll finish quickly just talking a little bit about the future for the tool, what I envisage for it. The techniques used here don't just have to work for OCR documents. So we will be looking at the output from the trained transcribers model, from the Lyle notebooks, to see how relevant the same techniques can be there. Can we extract other information as well as just the transcription that comes out from transcribers? Integration with authority holders, so enriching the data even further than we already have. So being able to look up people who appear in the Library of Congress names, and in the future perhaps do automatic matching against things like the Library of Congress names to provide linkable authority data for the people who appear. We'd like to finish building the initial data set, the training cycle, and try it out for building the catalogue. As has been mentioned, I think Rachel touched on this also in the Slack channel, that we were very lucky to be in a position to be able to experiment with stuff like this by virtue of the funding we've received for this project. So yeah, it's still all in an experimental phase. It's still all kind of up in the air about where we go with building tools on top of this for the future. But my big hope is that we will take this from like an experiment proof of concept into a working service as part of the digital library offerings, so that we can apply this to other collections, not just the session papers. This has been our kind of pilot demo for the technology, for the ideas, but the hope is that it will go bigger than that in the future. And then for all of you people like me who are open source zealots, we will open source the code, and we will make it so you can host and run this in your own workplaces, in your own institutions, for your own collections. An aim for the kind of grand goal of unlocking collections everywhere. So I'll knock off my screen share. I think there will be some space for questions in general at the end of this session, but right now I'll say thank you very much, and I'll pass back over to Elise to introduce the next.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was really illuminating. And I said it in the chat, but my jaw was on the floor when I first saw this tool in action. And it's meant such a lot for this collection, but we can also imagine it for others. And so up next, I'm going to bring on my wonderful intern, Evie Salter, whose work I talked about a little bit in terms of Transcribus, but she has been our main intern to work on the editor tool with the Scottish Court of Session Papers with Mike. And so she'll talk a bit about her experience. And after that, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So Evie, if you'll turn your camera on and I will share your slide deck.
Thank you, Elise. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Evie Salter. I'm one of the transcription interns on the editor team. Over the past 6 weeks, I've used Editor to transcribe and index the Scottish session papers. During my short presentation, I will be discussing how Editor works in practice, specifically from my own perspective as an intern. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So over the next 10 minutes, I will show what I've achieved so far in the role. I will then discuss my experience of familiarizing myself with Editor and processing the session papers, the approaches and techniques I use to work on Editor effectively, my use of notes conventions, and I will then finish with some final thoughts. Next slide, please. Okay, so since joining the Editor team at the end of January, I've worked a total of 32 hours across a period of 6 weeks. Some of my time was using Transcribus, as Elise mentioned. I've used this time to regularly meet with the team, learn the tool, familiarize myself with the session papers, and transcribe and index the collection. During this time, I have transcribed the front pages of one volume to completion and a broad range of random pages to maximize the tool's learning data. So in total, I've transcribed 76 documents, and within these, I've corrected and identified 1,394 entities that are mentioned within the papers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I would now like to talk through the learning curve of working with Editor in the session papers. For some context, I'm currently an MA Archives and Records Management student at University College London, and I'm due to graduate this coming September. I do have a solid foundation in archival work that I've built over the last few years, although I'll be the first to admit that before joining Editor, I had not worked with OCR technologies. 18th to 19th century collections were relatively new terrain for me, and I certainly have very little knowledge of Scottish history and the Scottish judicial system. But as it turns out, my initial concerns of my knowledge and experience gaps were completely unnecessary. In my first week, I attended a comprehensive editor training session held by Mike. This crucially included a show and tell element when Mike demonstrated the tool for us. I took some time after this session to practice with the program by myself to consolidate what I had learned in the session. Ultimately, I learned that the tool is fairly straightforward once you establish a simple workflow, something I'll discuss shortly. By the end of this first week, I felt confident in my use of Editor, and I was able to write a comprehensive user guide. That's the same guide that you will have been sent and will hopefully be using over the next few days. Now I would like to turn my attention to the session papers themselves. The context and legal jargon of this collection can at times be very difficult to grapple with, especially with the little knowledge of the subject matter. My first port of call was to read the brilliant article authored by Jim, who you met earlier, titled Window in the British Atlantic. I can link that in the Slack channel, it's definitely worth a read for you all. This gave me a great overview of the collection and, importantly, an understanding of the language used and the roles that existed in the Scottish legal context. I understand that this is all too lucky a circumstance. It's rare that we have a well-researched and accessible article at hand that solely and directly explains our own collection, no matter how much we would like one. Without this knowledge, I would have found it much more difficult to interpret the documents and accurately identify the entities and assign their roles. In the absence of such specific resources such as these, I would really encourage volunteers and interns like myself to start by researching the subject matter that they will be dealing with, whether this is provided by you, the employer, with training sessions or existing subject guides, or is independently led. Also, it is worth noting that having to only transcribe the front pages of each document within the volume significantly softened my learning curve. The front pages mostly succeeded to contextualize the legal proceedings I was reading about and introduce each entity and their roles in the case. This took out any second guessing I would encounter by dealing with the bulk of the case documents. This would take a lot of time for me to adequately contextualize and interpret for myself, and would be very complicated with its use of legal jargon. Essentially, working with the front pages of the documents turned a collection that really required specialized knowledge into something that was very manageable for a newcomer like myself. My learning curve was relatively steep yet very short. My background in archives, the choice made by my team to only transcribe the front pages of the papers, the training and resources provided my team, and their generous availability to happily answer any questions, all combined to give me a great foundation to learn quickly and independently with little trouble. This base of knowledge enabled me to confidently and independently approach my work just a week after starting my position. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So once I familiarized myself with editor and the session papers, I was able to turn my attention to how I could make my workflow simple and efficient. This can be really broken down into 5 very simple steps. Firstly, I'll skim the document I'll be transcribing to orientate myself with what is happening in that record. Next, I'll identify the document, so enter the title, the date, any marginalia, or acknowledge any problems. Then I'll check and correct any entities that the editor has found. So this includes assigning roles and making corrections or adding explanations in the comments field, something I'll come onto in a moment. After this, I'll add any entities the editor has overlooked, adding its name, its role, and any notes if needed. And finally, I'll log my work. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, my final step when working with a document in editor is to log my progress. When I began working with editor, I found I really needed a way to keep track of what I was doing. This would enable me to share this with the team or write down any problems I had with the document and the next steps that I had to take. So you're looking at one example in my logbooks. Here you can see my approach when working through single volumes. Next slide, please. And this is my approach when working through random pages. As you can see, it's a great way to visualize how much work has been done and easily identify any problems that need to be dealt with, or useful things that can not only help your volunteers and interns stay organized, but also keep you informed too. As you can see, my workflow process is efficient, comprehensive, and very straightforward. It's something that can be endlessly replicable and customizable in different contexts and with different collections, and therefore something that your own volunteers or interns can get to grips with very quickly. Next slide, please. So when I began to get stuck into my work, I found that when editor identified an entity, there were common mistakes that it had made that needed to be corrected. This is where the comments section of the entity table really comes into play. After a discussion with the team, it was agreed that the corrections or explanations in these notes really needed to be consistent and very simple. This task helped to clarify the transcription that's being done, not only for those doing the transcribing, but also for those managing the database too. I created a notes convention log to keep track of my decisions and to communicate this with others who are using the program. This is what you see here on the left-hand side of the slide. It's important to note here that this document continues to be a living document. Notes conventions are something that cannot necessarily be decided on before you start working with editor in your collection. It is something that you discover as you work, and I continue to add to this document even now as I come across new quirks that need correcting or explaining. So when I was deciding on the conventions, I had to balance the need for a convention to be brief, consistent, easy to replicate, understand, and remember. I decided that my formula would be the event, so what had happened or had gone wrong, colon, then the correction or the explanation. And I had to do this in as few words as possible. So for example, let's say the editor has correctly identified an entity, like Robert Beatson here, but has misspelled his name. On the left-hand side, you can see my decision of what to do when this occurs. And on the right-hand side, you can see how this works in the program. The convention works well. It hits all of the requirements that I've just mentioned. As you can see, this task is an ideal responsibility for someone in a similar role to me. It's a simple task best suited to someone immersed in the collection and an editor. They'll know what convention works best for them and the collection. Next slide, please. To summarize my time with the editor team, I would say it's been a wonderful and enjoyable learning experience. As an archives and records management student new to digital humanities, I was able to quickly orientate myself with editor and the session papers collection as a result of the support from my team. From the outset, I was given a number of responsibilities and relative independent ownership of my work, which only allowed me to be more productive and learn even more. It's been rewarding to see my contribution to this project, from the number of documents I've completed to my suggestions of customizing editor being implemented. I'd really encourage everyone listening to get volunteers and interns involved in any future OCR projects. It can be really beneficial for everyone involved. Okay, so that's all I have to say for now. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Evie. That was a wonderful overview of the incredible work that you've done on this project. Your work has been absolutely invaluable, as I'm sure everyone can see, not only in doing the tasks required, but also creating the convention logbook and more. So I am just going to go through ideas and some things that we've learned. I know it's common in the US perhaps to include students in projects, but in the UK it is relatively rare, and I'd say involving students like Evie in projects such as this, it has really allowed for new skills for Evie to develop, but also fresh perspectives for our team. Evie was able to bring the cutting edge knowledge that she's learning on her archives records course, and also have sort of a different take to the work at hand. She also brought her own style of working and found new ideas which I never would have thought of. And which really helped us in our own efficiency to make the tool more functional. And so by offering opportunities such as digital history we benefited from their fresh perspectives and working practices, but it's also part of their learning experience, and which the student then emphasize in their CV. And I'm sure we all know that digital skills now are key for employment. So in this case, Evie was able to come on this project with much experience in OCR, or as well without understanding Justinian code. And so it's been a really accessible project to include students that not only benefited them, but benefited the project as well. So now I'd like to bring Mike and Evie back on. You can both turn your camera, we'll stop sharing. And let's just take a look at the chat here. So some really positive comments here. Mike, I've got a question for you if you're there. Susan M has asked, can editor distinguish between cook as a surname and cook as an occupation?
So yeah, I covered this very briefly in the chat. The aim is that yes, we can do that. So one of the advantages of the natural language processing is that it considers the words in context. We're not just extracting the words one at a time and saying, what does this word say? But it looks at the context. So, you know, it has understanding of sentence structure, of object dependency, of all these kind of linguistic techniques for how you can parse some text into a dependency tree. So it is capable of distinguishing between, for example, cook and cook, surname or occupation. It might struggle a little bit more with London and London. But again, with the work that's happening on the transcription tool, providing a data set that has these things in context specific to the corpus being processed allows the model to be trained to kind of produce better results for those edge cases where, you know, where things are not clear cut. And I would like to touch very briefly, this is related to something Evie said about the annotation conventions not being known in advance. This is something also that I think was very important to the development of the tool to allow this kind of conventions that emerge as the work is being annotated, rather than having to try and define them completely in advance, which is somewhat of a fool's errand. Because you will always come across something you didn't think about, and then it becomes difficult. So to take these, and then that allows us also to feed back into the model more than we could have anticipated when we were first designing it, which is very kind of key for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just turn to Evie. We sort of covered that you didn't have experience with digital tools before, OCR technologies. And so I wonder now, after having finished just 8 weeks with us and having worked with Mike, how you would rate your interest or sort of experience and confidence with going after digital positions now.
No, absolutely. So before joining the team, the idea of digital being in any future job title seemed super scary, super out of reach, but coming into this internship where I was kind of given the flexibility and the understanding that I had very little knowledge or experience, kind of gave me the confidence to practice, ask questions, like learn from Elise, Mike, all of the team. And I feel like very quickly I became super comfortable. I stopped bugging you as much on Teams, and yeah, I'd be super confident in applying to future roles. And if anything, I would look for similar technologies in future job applications, because it's just super interesting. It's been super fun.
That's great. That's great. And I'd say the way we work together as well possibly helped with that, in that rather than finding the solution for you if you had questions, we worked together to sort of go through that process of bringing Mike in or bringing other members of the team in and sort of problem solving this. Because when we hired you, we didn't have all the answers. And together we've been able to work through everything, all with our different backgrounds and knowledge of the collection, which has been a really wonderful aspect of the project. So I'm just aware of time. I'm just going to stop the questions here. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to your question. And we're going to go on a break. But just as you go off on your break, I have a poll for everybody. So this is just a chance for us to understand where you are, where you're feeling, and we'll be able to address the bits that are pointed out from this poll. So if you wouldn't mind clicking and having a look through there, and after this we'll have a wee break. Right, okay, that's the end of the poll. Everybody have a good break. You can take a look at where the rest of the group are, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Thank you.